Lifestyle choices. Wow, what a comment. It took race relations back 100 years to me. It really did. Spiritually connected to land that you want to live on is not a lifestyle choice. You are part of that country and you want to live your life the way your ancestors did. You want to maybe take your kids bush and show them how to hunt, show them some really interesting things. But if you're in a welfare cycle, it's very hard to break it as well. And that welfare cycle has been set up for a long time. My grandfather managed to break it with us. They paid off their own little commission house in Grafton, and we all saw that as being, if Pop can do it, we can do it. And I look at that whole thing as just being, if those people are being displaced again from land, I think it would just be destroying them. It destroys culture. They're supposed to be closing the gap and not the communities. That's what I've seen people say. But then where do they have an option to go to, Tony? Do they go to town and get into trouble and become a burden there to the police force and everyone else? Or are they allowed to stay on country where their spirit is happiest? And even though it looks like, Western Australia is such a mineral-rich place, wouldn't you think that, like you say, the mining companies could just help run these places and give them some sort of purpose as well to stay on land? That should be the optimum goal, is to keep people on these communities.
Troy, I think you can see from the question that we just got that the lifestyle choice phrase is resonating out there with some sections of the community. So I'm wondering, would you be worried if this was something the Prime Minister picked up from a focus group and put out there?
I would be worried if it was from a focus group, because these people haven't been out into the regions to see how these people live. They haven't seen how happy the kids are. They haven't seen the power of the elders being able to sit down and talk in their own environment to impart stuff to these kids. That can't happen on city streets, Tony. It just can't. It's got to be really looked at, and I think it's really, to me, it's a criminal act to be able to take people off land again and push them aside like they're not even wanted. I would actually like to know what the government in Western Australia also wants to do with that land.
Fiona Nash. Is it a hard phrase to defend, first of all, for another politician? Do you find it difficult to defend? I mean, probably not a phrase you'd use yourself, I suspect.
I was just going to say it's probably not a phrase I would have used, but I think it's a really interesting question, and it goes to the broader issue of, in terms of spending money wisely, we do need to have a look at the issue that you raised of the broader context in terms of lifestyle choice. But just on this particular issue of these Indigenous communities, and particularly the homelands that the Prime Minister was referring to, something I think it's really important, and I've been responsible for Indigenous health since we came to government. I've been working really closely with the Indigenous sector. If there's going to be any change or any discussion about whether there's a better way forward for Indigenous communities, it has to be with the Indigenous communities, with the elders and with the leaders across those communities. Because one of the things that I've found, Tony,
but their message is pretty clear, isn't it? There's
been a lack of consultation too, which has been part of it as well.
Well, look, but I think to be fair, that they're very willing to talk to the government about what might be the way forward. It might be the status quo, it might be change, but we shouldn't be worried about having a conversation about these things.
Well, I've seen. I just want to add one point into this, because I've seen a former Liberal Party Indigenous Affairs Minister sit on the ground in the dirt with people and say, "We've got to get you out to your homelands," because that's where all of the influences in the town that are affecting you, drugs and alcohol, you name it, will not touch you. And why has the Liberal Party shifted its position so fundamentally on this issue?
Well, I don't think it has. But my point is that it's not about government making decisions about this sort of thing. And I'm talking broadly. This specific issue is a matter for the Western Australian government. But my view is, if we're not talking to the leaders in Indigenous communities across this country, we're not going to get the right way forward. We can't do things as government impose, in my view, on Indigenous communities. And in all of the relationship that I've had with the leaders across the Indigenous community, I can tell you, they understand and know this better, and they have so many of the solutions, and we've got to trust them to have the right solutions, but we've got to make sure as government that we include them and we're having that conversation.
So if the message from those Indigenous leaders, as it almost has unanimously been, is that this is a bad idea, will you drop it?
Well, look, I think there's been reaction to a comment. I think it's now time for a broader conversation about these matters. We want to make sure that we close the gap and Indigenous people have the best possible future that they can, and that's only going to happen if we work together to do it.
Everyone wants to get in. Just a quick question. Can you rule out that that comment didn't come from a focus group?
Oh, I have no idea where the comment came from, and I think that's probably a pretty unfair question because it could have come from anywhere, really. But it's highly, highly unlikely. I think it was a comment that was made.
Everyone wants to jump in?
Tony, surely the Prime Minister's comment could not have come from a focus group. That would make it premeditated. Surely someone would have advised the guy not to use it. It just seems inconceivable to me. I agree with everything
Mark
Troy...
Anthony's speech you just made?
I agree with everything Troy said, but I'll just add one point he didn't make. It's the stereotyping, the generalisation of the comment. I mean, there are some remote communities that have better health and education outcomes than some of our suburbs in our capital cities.
Absolutely.
Others don't do quite so well. So I think the generalisation and the stereotyping of Indigenous people was almost as bad as the comment
I've seen dry
itself.
communities on my way around that are so beautifully run, the intervention comes in, everyone gets pulled back into line.
Yep.
And they get, restrictions put on them just like the bad communities. And I mean, I've seen them work. I've been on the ground and talked to people out there in my career, and I do believe that people are most happy on their homeland,
Rob, do you want to get in?
Yeah, look, I don't see the comment, he fumbles words all the time, so I'm not overly upset about, the choice of words. What I am upset about is basically the government making a decision to shut down these communities. And if we ignore that, just put aside the Indigenous part, we're talking about communities on the end of a road, and where Supaljack is, where my family live, where they started the land. If anyone's got a connection to the land, I understand that. And I think, we've got three Aboriginal communities on all of our boundaries. And if the government was going to shut down those communities, we'd never get them roads fixed. Regional Australia would suffer if they started doing it in Western Australia and it became a consensus that everyone was going to start shutting down so-called bleeds on the economy or whatever it might be. Regional Australia is going to miss out. We're already suffering from pretty pathetic roads now. If we take more people out of the bush, it's just going to devastate rural Australia.